Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back. Take number 2.
Uh,
How long was the file that just got corrupted?
we had a 36-minute, well, it probably was like 34 or something like that, that was completely unusable because we sounded like robots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something weird happened.
I don't know. Maybe I'll clip like because I know it's not going to be fully captured the way that it was. Maybe I'll fully clip the Trelawney section, and it could be an extra if you want to hear robot us.
Be like, okay, now that at the
talking
end
about
here.
Trelawney.
One's ready?
One's
Just go right
ready.
into it. Just for the sake of our own sanity.
Yes, welcome back. We're here. Let's go.
Turn to page 291. There's nothing else going on.
No, it's not interesting.
The Quidditch Final. Today's lesson is called The Best Defense. A synopsis. The chapter begins with Hermione sharing Hagrid's note that they lost the case against Buckbeak, who is now sentenced to die. Hermione, Ron, and Harry make up in light of this tragic ruling and start to turn from fighting against each other to helping each other out and fighting against both Malfoys and Trelawney. Hermione oversleeps charms, and after listening to Trelawney make another prediction, excuses herself unceremoniously from Divination. In the Quidditch Final, Harry concludes that he should aggressively defend Malfoy, and despite Malfoy seeing the snitch first, Harry manages to snag it on his speedy Firebolt and win the Quidditch Cup.
Oh boy.
For Gryffindor.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay, so I annotated the chapter with my thoughts, and we basically walked through that. So
yeah, if it goes a different direction, we'll just let it go.
It can go in a different direction if it wants.
Could be short, could be long.
This is Hermione's chapter.
Yeah,
Harry wins, but like no one cares about that.
Well, you can see that there's a quote that I love that like forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. And I feel like Hermione gives that to herself, like in the midst of she forgives herself for what Crookshanks might have done to Scabbers, right? And she's like, "I'm so sorry." Oh no!
Yeah,
like,
this is
just
at the
a
beginning.
Sweet scene.
They make up.
It's a very real scene, right?
And,
it's like,
well, because she's overwhelmed. She's it's part
totally
of it. She's stressed, and then she just like it's time to let go. She's also upset because. I mean, poor Hagrid, he's like, oh, thanks for your help, Hermione. And like she tried really hard to help. And it's kind of that sort of frustration where it's like, you know that Hermione and Hagrid should have won this case, but and this is in part why I hate Lucius so much, is that I need him to be brought to justice for all of the horrible things he's ever done. Like you need to pay. You can't keep getting away with being a person getting what you want 24/7.
I was just thinking about how this is like a window into my job very frequently of like the emotional well-being of students amidst like high anxiety. And I think it's really interesting because an important part of understanding why emotional well-being would be important for students obviously important for everybody, but for students in particular is like, it's not that we're trying to eliminate students facing challenges. That it has nothing to do with like making school easier or whatever the case might be. It has to do with the absence of acknowledging that school is challenging and hard and comes in amidst like a bunch of other things that can be challenging, like in this scene, Buckbeak, that has nothing really to do with their academics.
Right.
But obviously like affects them very much.
So
I always find that really interesting. And like Hermione is the type of person like Alex Dunphy on Modern Family.
Oh my God.
Who would like benefit very much from professional intervention into like keep doing what you're doing, but with these new tools at your disposal to like process how difficult things are. Well,
part of Hermione is like, she has a lot going on. Like she wants to please a bunch of people. And I think part for her, the baggage of like wanting to belong in the wizarding world is that, I mean, she might not even see herself as enough. And so she's dealing with that. And if you're not satisfied with yourself and you're like, what is the word for it? I don't know what the exact word for it, but so she's like seeking for this external validation from other people to when ultimately, and of course I am not a professional in any sort of sense, but it seems to me that the way that she is acting is, you know, her growth is like coming to terms with who she is as a person, just like all of them kind of grapple with this. In the sense of their own identities and figuring out like who you are in this large wizarding world.
Well, I think we both love this about Hermione, is that she is a character whose maturation involves caring less about school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not often reflected in, it's just like Alex Stumpy. I'm glad that I thought about her.
Yeah.
Like one of the only other representations of like a kid who is unhealthily obsessed with academics.
Yeah.
And needs to reprogram, orient, whatever the word might be, a new perspective.
Yeah.
That's more healthy for them.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I can tell, in this story, Hermione provides that for herself, or kind of the external challenges of who being friends with Harry and like dealing with things that are bigger than school, often, or frankly more important than school, gives her that perspective. Whereas Alex Stumpy seeks it out in that beautiful episode.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites. So Hermione she just has a lot going on. Malfoy is just Malfoy taunting away as he does. We have the classic Ron usually physically goes after Malfoy. Harry's like chasing after. They both are usually the people that confront him, but they are not fast enough because Hermione has this like pent up rage that, I mean, she's usually the one that is level headed or being like, okay, like it's not worth it. But at this point, she like slaps him across the face, and we're all like, oh my gosh, Hermione. And she's about to like, I'm imagining her, she's like slap, and then she's just like about to like pounce down again, pulls out her wand. It's a whole thing.
Well, I mean, look, what is not relatable for me? I mean, it's super relatable what Hermione goes through and like reaching a breaking point.
Yeah.
And somebody who isn't really prone to physical violence being somebody who commits physical violence and seems to escalate a situation in a different way than in the past. And why is she doing that? Well, it's a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And how she is feeling overall is now and of course she has pent up anger towards Malfoy, maybe even redirected from a transference from Lucius and Buckbeak.
But also the whole thing of last year, Malfoy was so mean to her.
Right.
Calling
and to
her
all of them.
mudblood. And
there's that scene in front of the whole school where he's like, "You're next, mudblood," and it's like, bro. Jeez.
I mean,
oh my god.
I definitely would avoid Draco Malfoy IRL.
Hogwarts is a little hostile.
Yeah.
One of the Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, the teacher, I mean, you can't blame the teachers because, like, this is just, like, real life. Like, you can't control every moment of every day. These are just people interacting with each other, and sometimes it's just...
No, but Draco is also somebody who would benefit from a little assistance, professional assistance, even though his parents wouldn't allow him to get it. But
yeah,
I think, we talked in the Broken episode about... Lucius and my love for and desire to kind of look back and forwards at all the times that Lucius comes back comes up in a chapter. How often does Draco also come up in that chapter, and like how are they sort of positioned in ways that like evoke emotional response? Because I think in this one, like we sense there's such a clear reason why J.K. Rowling puts the timing of these two things together, right? Like having the Quidditch Final and having this breakdown for Hermione, and then obviously Lucius being involved with Buckbeak. Like it's a lot. It's just a lot. And it like what I said before, and we talked about how like we kind of cycle with Draco a little bit, is like putting Lucius juxtaposed in the same chapter with Draco always gives me just an inkling more pity and empathy for Draco and like how much he lashes out. Because we have to remember he is also a 13-year-old. He is also processing a lot of things, including knowing that his father is lying in front of the board in order to like get a creature.
But that perspective
murdered.
is hindsight after you know the full story, isn't it? Because like
up to this point, it seems like he likes it.
Yeah, well, so much of the construction of Draco, and we've talked about this before in previous episodes, is tied to the fact that he is a Malfoy, or that he's in Slytherin. It's like these things that there's no reason to believe that it doesn't fit the already molded archetype of like, who would a child of Lucius Malfoy who is also a Slytherin, like who would that person be?
Agreed.
So yeah, it's hard of like, we've talked about perceptions and like, or the ways that these narratives or stories shape things, and it's really hard to break out of.
Yeah. Well, and it's the difference often for me in my mind of the difference of an excuse. I'm not excusing Draco's behavior.
Yeah.
I am understanding, or like not an excuse for, but the reason, the cause of, or part of the cause. Because I do think we get some insight in book 2 as well to like this being actually quite a emotionally and perhaps even physically abusive relationship.
Yeah, when Lucius just like brushes him off, and
like Harry sees them in the under the cloak and all that, and and like in Madame Malcolm's and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I mean, I don't excuse Draco. I tend to think like, I mean, look, how complicated is it to deal with the question of like maturity or understanding it, and what the relationship between growing up and experimenting and making mistakes and learning is to like excusing behavior that shouldn't be excused, even though a person is 13, right? Like, when does being young stop being an excuse? And sort of how is that? It's different for different people. Different people will look at Draco as a 13-year-old and say he's just a kid, and other people will be like, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting also because as you are so much of when you're younger, you have a lot more first experiences. So I think part of why some people put a lot of importance on education, I'll just say, in early childhood or younger grades is that like, because you have, I guess, more opportunity to grow, or like you then if you have like an intervention early on, then like that'll impact more years of your life or whatever. But thinking about it's so messy because I want to say like, how has it been so he's gotten away with this for so long? Because I imagine Lucius probably is the same story, just based on like the way that he acts, and he just thrusts his power around and gets what he wants and does whatever. But do the teachers really stop Draco? Like, does he actually get in trouble? Like, it doesn't seem like it. It seems that somehow he's still enabled to act the way that he does, because he doesn't change. Nothing makes him change.
That's right.
And so why would he change his behavior? Because it's kind of like that reinforcing of like, oh, this is how I act, or oh, I'm gonna tease Potter, oh, I'm gonna tease Weasley now, oh, I'm gonna like call Hermione a mudblood. Like, that's like part of his, I don't know, it kind of goes back to the thing that I was reading about like these like early scripts that are formed when you're really young of like who you are, who you should be. And a lot of that is shaped by just the people you're around, which is more often than not other adults. And so like, what are those values or messagings that get perpetuated? And also when because people are individual like agentive beings, like how those things clash as well, of like this scripted story of who you should be versus who you want to be.
I think one of the things that drew me to the Harry Potter series in general when I was around this age is that J.K. Rowling writes kids as if they're young adults.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean like the classification of young adults, but as if they're just young humans.
Yeah.
So their mental and emotional processes are almost identical. Really, I'll just say like identical to what an adult or older human might do in that situation in terms of like, because you can see the mirroring, like how Lucius lies, how Draco lies. And they're doing that because they realize the set of circumstances around the lie allow them to perpetrate it as truth and say like this thing should be killed. But I think what is also beautiful about these stories is that in the same way that the teachers don't really affect Draco's behavior, they don't affect Harry's behavior either.
Yeah.
He gets detention all over the place, but detention is a superfluous punishment.
Yeah.
I mean, even like you can see how it escalates too. And then we get to Umbridge, who tortures kids instead of detentioning them. Like that is also not that effective for most kids, right? It actually like increases their resolve to act the way that they were. So obviously there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it's really important to tell stories about kids that don't frame them as naive.
Yeah.
Now they might be facing novelty more frequently than adults by nature of being, living longer.
Right.
But they're not naive in the sense of like unable to cope with new situations. Of course they can. They do all the time. And they face, and the problems that they face, like Hermione, Draco, Harry, like grappling with this is the same stuff that Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Snape do, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful, I guess, realizations that I've had related to that was when I started watching the React channel by Fine Brothers, and they because they have different series where it's like kids react to this, teens react, adults react, elders react, and sometimes they do mashup episodes where it's across generations, and when those episodes in particular, you're like, wow, every generation has the range of things that you say, how you react to something. It's the same piece of media that they're all reacting to. And you realize, especially when you come to the realization of like, oh, this old person was a little tiny chunk at one point in their life. And so I don't know. So thinking about people in a very complex way, regardless of how old you are or what your experiences are.
We haven't watched that in a little while, but that's a perfect connection of like what we're trying to say here of like, we both challenge very heavily narratives of youth, like what it means to be young when it comes to education, and in particular generational stuff. Where it's like generations are defined by the circumstances, but like it is not the case that like generations are fully defined by those circumstances. And I think your point is well taken. There's an episode of I think Kids React where they're given, because we all know the sort of prototypical narrative of like giving an elderly person a new piece of technology and like having them be befuddled. And you're probably smiling because you know where I'm going with this, because there's an episode where they give kids, young kids, iPods, not iPhones, but old iPods with physical buttons, and it was just music and it wasn't a phone and all this. And they were likewise like, what the heck is this? So similarly, like I think they did rotary phones and stuff like that. And so of course, like we're products of our circumstances and experiences. It's not an interesting joke, though it's a joke that is told in kind of the sad sense of like make fun of people for being a product of their experiences. I don't know.
Sorry, I didn't live in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And I won't live in the future. Like
I don't know.
I won't understand future stuff,
The future. So after this altercation with Malfoy, our three friends go to Charms class. well, we think that all of them are there because Flitwick is like, hey, and referring to Harry and Ron, being like, we partnered up. Hermione's nowhere to be found, which they find Hermione later, but they end up learning about the cheering charm, which is a charm that makes the target feel elated. So they all left class all happy. Also to note, though, when the charm is overdone, it can cause the victim to be overcome with fits of hysterical laughter. So, cheering charm. Felix Summerby was the inventor of this cheering charm. I already showed you this picture, so maybe I'll put it up here for our viewers on YouTube to see. But Felix was the first featured Wizard of the Month on J.K. Rowling's original website. Where she would feature a witch or wizard every single month. This was back in May of 2004. And yeah, so that's what I found out about the cheering charm. He's also on a chocolate frog card. But there is a connection back to, this is forward when they take the OWLs, where Hermione is actually worried that she didn't write enough about the cheering charm in her exam. And it's funny because in this chapter, after they find her in the common room and she's asleep and she's just like, oh, I can't believe I missed it. So she went to go talk to Flitwick, and she's concerned because she's like, I bet they come up in exams because Flitwick hinted that they might. So it'd be funny if like that connection back to the OWLs, that she's stressed because she missed this one class in third year. And based on her discussion of Hermione, that thought probably has crossed her mind for future Hermione.
I'm flabbergasted by whatever J.K. Rowling's organizational structure is to be able to. I don't know if she just gets lucky, but it doesn't. That's too specific.
It's very specific.
Feel like that it's luck to me.
Yeah.
Why cheering could have been anything. Right?
Yeah.
So somehow she like notated to herself,
maybe she had
told her
own
editors like
secret wiki.
put this list together of like things I should call back to.
Yeah.
Oh, Hermione and the cheering charm. Like Hermione is uncertain about the cheering charm. Therefore, I'm going to put on this test.
Yeah. Well, I find it really interesting with this like collective, like the fandom with the wikis, because it's not like I would make this connection. It's because anytime cheering charm appears, like someone goes into the wiki and they add like a little note. So it's kind of cool with the internet to see those connections be connected, because we're like, you have this whole like body of text that you're able to be like, oh, mentionings of this, let me like
now all the games and stuff too. I mean, it makes doing this podcast right now quite a bit fun, because if we find something to look up on the wiki, it usually is like connected to stuff that we don't know about, and we're like, oh, wow.
And we're like, wait,
like
what?
This guy, right? Like this
for sure.
cheering charm guy.
I'm like, oh, let me just like
Felix.
scour the internet. And well, it's funny because like, so this image that I found is, the website is not there, but like the internet is forever. Like that's literally, the internet is forever. So it exists on the internet still, even though it's not a live page anymore. So after all of this, they end up, another class session we see is with Divination, which we had an extensive conversation about in our first recording.
Put it at the end of this. Yeah.
So Hermione, we've mentioned before, does not like Trelawney at all. I wrote in my notes that in this class context, she is the Malfoy in this situation. Like Malfoy is to Hagrid, Hermione is to Trelawney, doesn't care, is really mean, says mean things, and then Trelawney goes off on Hermione, which probably doesn't help given Hermione's state of, emotion and mind and all of that. But she goes off and calls Hermione's mind hopelessly mundane, and Hermione's like, okay, I don't need this anymore. And then it kind of goes silent, and Lavender's like, oh, you were right. You said around Easter, one of our number, the actual quote is, one of our number will leave us forever. One of our number will leave us forever. But wasn't that, I forgot to go back to the actual chapter.
Just vague enough. Could be about somebody in the class.
After she looked at the tea leaves for Harry? Or
no, it's just like part of the beginning.
It was the intro.
She has a bunch of things that she says.
Because wasn't McGonagall like, I think a lot
there's
of them always a student who's going to die or like be gone or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But like that, but I appreciate the specific quote because
Yeah.
one thing we talked about was con artistry and like how the usefulness of being vague.
Mm-hmm.
One of our number could refer to somebody in the class, could refer to somebody in the school, could refer to like just general somebody is connected to somebody who dies or leaves or whatever. And like leaves forever. Does she actually leave forever? She just leaves the class. Like, so the interpretive nature,
It's
why
not death,
prophecies aren't specific, the less specific in this type of way, the vagueness, they're not hedging.
Yeah.
It's vague on purpose. It's not actually an interesting prediction in any way.
And vagueness is one aspect, but I also feel like this is part of just the inclination for humans to as sense makers. So even if you put two things together and try to make sense of a connection, you're probably I mean, that's kind of like what we talked about with the Grimm stuff. Like you see what you want to see. Like if you're already thinking like, oh, this is what's going to happen to me, and you keep thinking about that and you're looking for signs and you're like, see, I'm right. Like this is the confirmation bias of it all.
Yeah.
And part of it is, I mean, there is a comfort in being like, okay, I feel settled. I mean, I wasn't expecting to talk so much about anxiety, but like this, I feel like this chapter is just filled with it. Yeah, perhaps this book entirely
everyone snaps, like so many people snap. And express their anxieties in different ways. Or like Hermione snaps, physically abusive, verbally abusive. Trelawney snaps.
Yeah.
Hagrid snaps. Yeah. Harry snaps, in the game, in the sports sense.
We're all snapping.
It's very interesting. I mean, it really is. And compared to when the broken recording, now I'm feeling pity for Trelawney because I'm trying to embody her a little bit and thinking like, she's an alcoholic.
Yeah, I was hardcore defending Trelawney in the last one.
She has the burden of being born to a lineage of famous seers.
That must suck.
She gets hired by an amazingly famous wizard, Albus Dumbledore, to do something that she herself knows that she's a fraud at.
Yeah.
Insofar as like she is unaware that she even made the two main prophecies that we'll know about her making. She's unaware. So like all of this, it's amazing then to have this sense of like, this is why it's not useful to delineate between kids and adults is in terms of emotional maturity very frequently, because adults mishandle their stressors in the same exact ways. I do in the same way that I would have as a kid, or in different ways, but like it's just part of being a human who's alive, is like grappling with change and things that are difficult and the baggage that we carry. And kids have it and adults have it, and there aren't that many wise people walking around.
Well, and I'm sure the wise people have their own stuff. Everyone has their own stuff.
Somehow they're self-aware.
Speaking of the stressors, that's actually my next point, which is about the overwhelming amount of work that the students have over the Easter holiday. And they're like all stressed. I mean, this whole like leading up to the Quidditch match, no wonder everyone is just like beating each other.
We've said this a lot of like J.K. Rowling has a sort of timeliness. Like it's somehow like the themes of the book are timely, like, but it's just because these are at least for our lifespans relevant constantly. They haven't been resolved. The issues of like anxious school children
But okay, so this thing about my question in my notes is, are the students overworked because the adults are pushing off their stress and like trying to compensate or cope or avoid coping with the stress of Sirius Black coming in and whatever? And I made a connection to the pandemic, but that right there is an example of what I was talking about before with sense making, is that I'm reading this book in 2021 and I've had a whole year of working in a pandemic setting and all of this. And so this connection I'm making exists because I'm trying to make sense of it. So it's kind of like this,
understood. But it helps you process it. right? Seeing yourself reflected in fiction is often cathartic in
I'm
that
talking
way.
about the prophecy discussion, though,
okay.
of like being like, oh, well, you're saying these broad things, or you're trying. It doesn't necessarily have to be vague or broad for people to make connections where that wasn't the intention, or that wasn't like the point. You know what I mean? But that's just because people make sense of things through whatever lenses and contexts that we're processing.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I definitely think that because we, you know, I could totally see the adults being like, all right, everyone keep working. Like, we have a murderer trying to come into Hogwarts. Don't worry. Just
give them an extra essay so that they don't wander off at night. You know, that type of stuff.
Logic, right?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, that is so, it's so real. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what we're experiencing.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Give them more.
Yeah.
Things just got a lot harder for the world. Give them more to do.
Yes.
These kids like are missing their high school years, but we should give them extra work.
Yeah, for sure. So Hermione is very stressed out, obviously. There is a throwback that I put in my notes to chapter 14 of Chamber of Secrets, because a year ago, last Easter, our friends who were in the second year were making choices for the third year. What classes are they going to take? And so there's this whole discussion. Hermione is stressed back then too, where she said, it could affect our whole future. She says that to Harry and Ron. And she's like looking over all the list and whatever. And Harry and Ron are just so casual about it.
It could affect the whole future is exactly the flavor of vague prediction that also annoys me, right? Because it doesn't speak in any way to the magnitude in which it will affect their future, the classes that they pick. We hear that stuff in education so much. Of course it affects the future, but it might be infinitesimally small of an effect, but it still affects it. Like, it's different than them not taking these classes. It's like, yeah, of course it's different.
Yeah.
That's a different life, but the point is, like, it might not be influential.
The message of the episode is stop saying vague things. Well, because in this context, Hermione is she? Well, I guess the difference between Hermione and Trelawney in this sense is that Hermione's not going around like preaching to people, but still, it's the idea.
Is.
No, she's not
in book 2 though.
She's not being
take
like
this seriously, you know.
Well, actually, no, you're probably right, because I could see Hermione being like, "See, I told you so."
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, Ron, you didn't take arithmancy, like, look how behind you are.
Yep. Which, of course,
or
is
Rose.
Like, these are the things that kids say that are, I mean, whether you want to think of it as a recirculation, it's just a thing that people say. And so, because later on, Percy decides to go tell Harry all about his wisdom about life, I guess.
Percy in the Muggle world would be telling a 13-year-old to open a savings account.
Yeah. You know? Well, because Percy's literal...
Never too early.
Yeah, his literal line is,
Learn
it's never too early to think about the future.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend Divination.
You know, Percy, actually, it is sometimes too early to think too far into the future.
In that paragraph, he also kind of like it speaks to what we can see play out in this book of well, actually, I don't know if we see it too much. So Muggle studies is seen as like I don't know how he says it, sort of like a soft career or something like it. Yeah, and he's like, but I think it's important. So there's of course hierarchies that exist in, well, we know this, but in the wizarding world with
that's
subjects.
Percy.
Huh?
Percy says that?
Yeah, Percy says something.
Interesting relationship to his father.
Yeah, because he was like, well, my dad uses it.
Hey,
blah,
Lucius
blah, blah,
and kids and their fathers. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Kids and their fathers.
There's so much going on. I'm in like a whirlwind mindset right now where I'm just like.
Well, it doesn't help that I'm like, this connects directly to book 2.
Yeah, no,
like,
it's
blah, blah,
but it's
blah.
a great. I think I just popped the mic, but it's great though to have that connection because it is so real. Even if we're drawing the connection, like this kind of vacuous advice giving is man,
and Hermione in book 2 in this chapter took nobody's advice but signed up for everything.
Took nobody's advice.
Yeah, she's just like, I gotta do it all because this is Hermione. And not okay, so here's my thing, we'll talk about this later when we find out more about what's really going on with Hermione, but like, and the fact that people are like, yeah, sure. Yeah. Who's looking out for her?
Yeah.
Who is looking out for Hermione? Yeah. Oh
hey,
my God.
Hermione, maybe you don't need to take these classes.
Now I'm getting angry about it. I'm being like,
I'm also angry.
Who was looking out for this
I wasn't
girl?
that angry. I guess I was angry about other stuff in the broken episode. Yeah.
Now I'm angry for like people who allowed Hermione to sign up for all the classes without caring for her whole well-being.
Yep.
Jesus.
Oh, here's a drug. We'll give you.
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay, it's a time turner.
You can stay awake for 24 hours.
Yeah,
don't worry.
It's definitely not.
And I mean, she seems to be like deteriorating over time. Like people should
of
see this. And what, you're just brushing it off of like, oh, it's just Hermione.
And they insist that she keep it secret.
Oh my God.
So she has that extra baggage of like, I can't even tell my closest friends why I'm randomly disappeared.
This whole show is just like anti the adults at Hogwarts.
It's good that we're re-recording this because I feel like our energy is totally different and it's cracking me up. In part because we're like specifically trying to avoid deja vu, I think, of like saying the exact same thing. So it's like, let me take a different spin at it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, now we're at the Quidditch match.
We're
at the end of the chapter. So all of the houses, except for Slytherin, are rooting for Gryffindor, which is really funny to me. I made this connection to Chamber of Secrets, just asking, what do they know? Probably nothing. I don't know if they know that Ginny opened it or if it... They heard the myth, according to Binns, about Salazar Slytherin and whatever. Slytherin already has a reputation. I don't know. I would imagine that... Well, I don't know, because I can't imagine the teachers at Hogwarts being like, all right, students, let's have a debriefing and talk about this serious issue that is plaguing our wizarding world where we have pureblood supremacy.
No,
like,
of course,
I don't see
just
that
like regular school.
It's just like, no, go on to the next class.
Some tragedy happened in class. Like, let's talk about triangles.
Let's talk about So, and all of the fouls are like all of the everything is coming out.
It's my most favorite scene so far involving Quidditch. Yeah, because it really makes me feel of like somebody who's played team sports, as have you, like living it in, and like there's a little more detail and a little bit more tactic, and like it's kind of interesting and it seems more intense, and there's a champion, and it's fun. It's fun.
You did it, Harry.
Harry Potter.
You did it.
Thank God for the Firebolt.
Oh,
ain't no Nimbus in here. Who would have lost?
Yeah. Well, McGonagall, now I'm thinking about McGonagall confiscating it, and she probably, even though she wanted to like look at it, she probably was like, please don't let there be anything wrong with this. Like,
yeah. We've talked a little bit about like there's a hole in, a lot of people have spoken about this, like there's a hole in the rules of Quidditch, which is like catching this snitch. And so we actually, at some point, I think J.K. Rowling probably grappled with the hole and was like, I'm gonna write this into the book. So she does in book 4, where it's like, you can catch the snitch to end the game even though you're gonna lose. Like, why would you ever do such a thing?
Yeah.
And it's because you like have come to grips that like you're not gonna catch up. But it's an interesting thing. I was thinking of like, what would be like just off the top of my head, like an equivalent thing about like a Muggle sport if you created something like this. And I was thinking about basketball, and it'd be like, if at the end of the game, the side that's losing gets to take one half-court shot free, and if they make it, they win. Right? So it's like, I mean, that's not even that good because it's random.
That's
but
funny.
Like, yeah, it's like that, right? It's very peculiar.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, good stuff.
Well, yeah, that's all.
I'm satisfied.
I don't want to talk about this.
I'm satisfied. Yeah, let's get...
Only because we had to record this twice. Until next time.
Wands ready.
ready.